All right. As I announced earlier, we'll have three presentations by our faculty members. The first one will be from Dr. Jonathan Rosen in the middle. Dr. Rosen is an assistant professor here at the Department of Professional Security Studies. His research focuses on drug trafficking, organized crime, and security. He has published 20 books with different venues and a multitude of journal articles. Dr. Rosen has participated in grant-funded research studies in El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Colombia, and Mexico. So we are happy to have him speak today about an important topic of crime in that region. And then we have a second presentation by Dr. Scott Fisher and myself, as I said earlier. Dr. Fisher is an assistant professor here at the department as well. His research focus is on information warfare, U.S. national security challenges in East Asia, and open source intelligence. Prior to joining NJCU, Dr. Fisher worked as a crisis management analyst for the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon. He deployed to Iraq as a Department of Defense civilian and served tours in Afghanistan and East Africa as an Army Reserve officer. Well, myself, yeah, you usually don't introduce yourself, do you? So I'll move to the next presenter, Dr. Malcolm Wilsey. Dr. Wilsey is an associate professor here at the department. His area of academic focus is applied forensic science in national security, law enforcement, and related fields. Dr. Wilsey has over 20 years of experience in law enforcement in New Jersey, most of which was spent as the supervisor of a county-level crime scene and evidence management unit. Dr. Wilsey has extensive training and experience in the areas of crime scene investigation and analysis, homicide and death scene investigation, fingerprint examination and comparisons, bloodstain pattern analysis, and shooting reconstruction. In addition to all this work, fantastic work that he does, Dr. Wilsey is also a licensed psychologist in New Jersey and has experience working as a clinical and forensic psychologist. So we are happy to have you today talk about this important topic as well. With that, I'll give it to Dr. Rosen to open up. Yeah, from here. Okay. So we have the slides.
Perfect. Just make sure it works. Okay.
Excellent.
Okay. So thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. Our guest speaker also was a very humble individual, so I'll say it, but he was very high up in the U.S. Southern Command. So this talk might remind him of many briefings that we've had in different areas. So I've been doing some work on criminal governance in the Northern Triangle countries, Guatemala, Honduras, and Salvador. I usually wouldn't say this but this is a student event, so I feel like I should say it, just to see how sometimes difficult the process is. I'm going to be talking about one article we just got published. I've actually been working on a book-length project on this and was very, very fortunate after 3 years of rejections at journals to get an acceptance with my co-author, Jose Miguel Cruz, in the flagship journal. But just so students see, this took 3 years of being rejected, revising the entire thing. And this was based on actually 4 grant-funded studies, 2 of which I was a part of prior to coming here. Don't worry, I published under the NJCU name, right? But just to show you, I usually wouldn't say that, but because this is a student event, it's like we were literally thinking, if we don't get published here, I'm not sure where we're going to get published because it doesn't fit here. We've tried this journal, that journal. So it took 3 years. And then we finally just got to revise and resubmit an acceptance in criminology, which is kind of the flagship journal in this particular area. So anyway, I would just say that for the students that realize it's for us faculty as well. It's a lot of rejection, and keep going. Anyway, a little bit about the projects and some of the forthcoming works. So, first of all, why would the U.S. government care about this? Why does this matter for us? Why is someone studying this? People in Southcom study this all the time, right? Latin America is an important partner for the United States. While there's no active wars, it is arguably, depending on who you talk to, one of the most important allies. And then, by the way, violence in the region, particularly in Central America, impacts the United States. There's 1.4 million people waiting in immigration court. If you follow the news, there's been a lot of situations. I don't like the term parole. It sounds like, you're being paroled from prison, but people who are paroled for temporary status, fleeing, political violence in Nicaragua, fleeing violence in Venezuela, where you've had, 2 million refugees go to different parts around the area. But the Northern Triangle countries have been the most violent in the region, right? And actually in the world. In 2015, El Salvador had a homicide rate of 103 per 100,000. That makes it the most violent, made it the most violent non-warring country in the entire planet. Country of 6 million people, where there are 80,000 gang members, 500,000 people connected to gangs. So one of the things that we've been looking at in some of the studies, we did a study funded through USAID, comparing criminal governance in the Northern Triangle. What does it actually mean, right? Now, when you go to different neighborhoods in Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, gangs, particularly Mara Salvatrucha, MS-13, which is founded in the United States in the 1980s, the 18th Street Gang, which is actually founded in the United States in the 1960s, the U.S. deported them without a criminal record. So they went back to Central America, no records. People who served time in prison for 20 plus years for all sorts of crime were deported back, and the gangs ballooned, right? You had a lot of kids from marginalized neighborhoods who were stigmatized, discriminated against, who really, fled gang violence or fled violence and the civil wars in Central America, and then were deported back, some of them whom spoke better English and Spanish, right? And the gang ballooned. So MS-13 in reality is not a drug cartel. They're involved in extortions of primary enterprise, right? And people say, well, why would we care about this, right? Well, there's a lot of businesses involved in Latin America. The Northern Triangle countries, these three, extortion's about $1 billion a year in profit for gangs. Right, so people entering and leaving territory are extorted. Often they're threatened, often they're killed, and this leads to a lot of people fleeing and applying for asylum, often under the Convention Against Torture, right, which you have to prove in court that there's a 50% plus chance that you're going to be killed or tortured if you're deported back. So we have 1.4 million cases. We lack 2,000 judges to process all these cases. You have cases waiting for 4 or 5 years. By the way, if you're detained, you sit in jail while you're waiting for this. So at the end of the day, it's been a really important issue for many administrations, right? And the Biden administration's focused a lot on kind of the deep-seated causes. What I wanted to go and focus here, so I talked a little about violence. I decided, since I use PowerPoint every day, that I'm going to talk more because I feel like I use PowerPoint so much that I decided to speak a little bit more. But you can see where gangs control territory. You can map it. It changes every day. They often control via graffiti. They have lookouts. They're based and designed in different cliques, right? So this is the capital city of El Salvador. This is San Pedro Sula in Honduras, which has a large gang presence. But fundamentally, what do I mean by criminal violence? What do I mean by criminal governance? In plain English, what that means is they operate as a de facto authority, right? So anyone entering territory pays extortion. Anyone entering territory, there's a lookout, right? The gang sets the rules of the game, right? And most of the academic literature studies Brazil, which is an enormous country, studies Colombia, and some in Mexico, right? Mexico is a country with 125 million people, 32 states. El Salvador, 6 million, right? It's the size of Ohio. It's a very different world, right? So we decided to kind of propose new theoretical and methodological concepts for understanding the notion of criminal governance, right? Now, to give you an example, we were doing focus groups in the region, and someone said, we had someone from the United States come in, and of course, they thought, I want a police escort going into a gang neighborhood. And the person said, wait. This is a person working in kind of intervention worker, mental health, dealing with children, prevention. They said, hold on. This is a very American way of thinking, right? You want a police escort and a bunch of armed soldiers coming into a gang neighborhood. It is the opposite of what you think. That makes you less secure because it annoys the gang, right? Because now they have eyes on them, right? Now they have people going into the zone where they dominate. Now, is it the entire country? Absolutely not, right? Is it all of, every country in Latin America? No, absolutely not. But you see zones where gangs set the rules of the game, right? And so in reality, we designed one of these articles looking, like how do intervention workers, how do people deal in prevention, deal with gangs? One, and this is not popular, and we gave a lot of talks to the U.S. government and said, we're not promoting this, right? They negotiate with the gangs, in reality, under the table. Say, listen, we're dealing with a youth prevention program. We're working in a certain neighborhood. They have to basically ask permission to go in, to not get harassed. That's not very popular. The president of El Salvador, the U.S. government has sanctioned him, so I can say it's now been proven, right? Spent the last year cutting a deal with MS-13, right, in the prison system, despite arresting, thousands of gang members. Another strategy is leave them alone. Doesn't really work so well in gang neighborhoods. We found out that gangs would send spies to intervention programs. We'd have gangs lookouts, right? Gangs, often if there's a problem in a gang neighborhood in Honduras, you don't go to the police, you go to the gang, right? So again, I think it's interesting that you bring in and I'm not knocking anyone, but you bring in a non-governmental worker from New York City to El Salvador. They want the police escort, they want security, want all the stuff. Context matters. I think that's my biggest lesson that I give to people when I talk to USAID or the State Department. Context matters, right? We can always learn models from Los Angeles or New York or wherever, but applying every single model without understanding the context. We also found in our research when we came up with these different options, and I'm mixing a couple different papers and talking about generalities, and I promise I'll be quiet in just a minute. My time is running short. But one of the options too that we would see is going after the gangs. This tends to be referred to as kind of mano dura, or you see this a lot in Central America. It's very popular, deploying the military. The U.S. funds a lot of these programs, and this has often led to more violence, right? So I think the context matters. You've seen massive levels of spikes in the prison system. You've seen recent crackdowns in El Salvador. The U.S. government is very critical of human rights abuses, a lot of arresting and rearresting the same individuals. And despite these kind of crackdowns and arrests, the gang problem has not disappeared. The gang problem has not gone away. Prisons in El Salvador and Central America in general tend to serve as schools of crime. Most of the leaders of the gangs are actually behind bars. So to sum up, why, again, trying to understand this kind of typology of how gang violence works, how gangs implement the rules of the game or sort of criminal governance, and why does this matter for the United States? Long term, the U.S. military gives a lot of aid, but also understanding the underlying structural issues. And I would end on this point, right? The United States, for example, spoke to about the previous president of Honduras being their guy in terms of mil-to-mil cooperation, Juan Orlando Hernandez. He was recently extradited to the United States, is facing life in prison, right? His brother is serving a sentence in prison in the United States for drug trafficking. The chief of police was extradited to the United States, facing life in prison. So fundamentally try to understanding how can we understand the gang problem? How can we understand the role of the U.S. government, whether it's aid in terms of military, whether it's aid in terms of prevention reinsertion, and finally, how do we understand, in some of my research, looking at institutional factors, corruption, strengthening the state, strengthening institutions. So that's kind of a really broad paintbrush stroke of, a couple, 4 or 5 different projects, but kind of focusing on criminal governments, gangs, and violence in Central America. So thank you so much. I will end there. Thank you.
Pat Fisher, Dr. Kojo has been kind enough to let me run with this, so hopefully he doesn't regret it in the next few minutes. But what we're going to be presenting on today is a paper and a research project we did for NORAD, North American Aerospace Defense Command, and NORTHCOM, U.S. Northern Command. And so we'll actually be presenting this next week in Colorado. So this provides us a nice opportunity to do a little practice of a subset. Next week, we're talking about China and Russia. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about Russia. And our research is in response to the RFP from NORAD NORTHCOM, a particular question: are there useful ways? So, how might NORAD and NORTHCOM bring those things? So that's the question. So we wrote a proposal. They accepted our proposal, and so we then did some research to examine exactly that. And the answer we found is yes. There are ways of assessing and evaluating deterrent activity. But how do we do it? That's what we'll talk about today. So the first thing, we use a framework called the DIME framework. Diplomacy, information, military, and economic. It's a standard way, a relatively common way of looking at statecraft. Different things you can do as foreign policy or a national security practitioner to affect another country, or sometimes a violent extremist organization. Our focus is authoritarian countries. So we're using the DIME construct to look at this, and you can see some examples of their diplomacy, information, military, economic, diplomacy, UN resolutions. So for Russia, for example, in March of 2022, just after the February invasion of Ukraine, the UN passed some pretty powerful resolutions condemning Russia for the invasion. Information. Reports for today, we looked at Reporters Without Borders. Right? It's a common NGO that does evaluations of how different countries control access to information, right? Whether it's for the press or whether it's for your everyday citizen trying to access the internet. Military. Exercises along the border with Russia. And then finally, and other countries to focus on Russia. But I'd like to make this a little bit interactive. Right? So, Chatham House rules. No one's going to be quoted. You're not going to be a test afterwards. I'd just like to say, right, for Russia, which one of these creates the most powerful effect? Which dying tool creates the most powerful effect? And we'll go through it as we go through the presentation. We think diplomacy, UN resolutions in this case, create the most powerful effect for Putin and the leadership. Please raise your hand. That's the strongest effect. Right? Information. Right? Who thinks information creates the most powerful effect? Okay, we've got one person, two people. All right, so we've got three people. So we got 0, I've got 3. And I presented this presentation and ones like it at meetings of information warfare professionals. It's about the same ratio. Right? Very few people do that. Like that. Military. Who thinks a NATO military exercise is the strongest one? Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. All right, so we've got 11 for the M. All right. All right. Notice the Marines put their hands up. And then finally, economic sanctions. Who thinks economic sanctions are the most powerful? 1, 5, 6, 7. All right, so 7. All right, so we've got 11 for the M, 7 for the E, all right, 3 for information, and then 0 for the. Let's take a look. All right, so first off, how do we do this? All right, so first we gather a bunch of data. Previously funded by ODNI. NJCU, we're a Intel Community Center of Academic Excellence, ICCA. All right, as part of that grant, we got that designation, all right, but it also funded some data collection. So we went out and collected all of this data, not a subset, everything online in English from Russia Today, RT, Sputnik, and the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We collected it all right, and that's our data. Not a subset, everything included. Why English? Right, that's how the countries kind of message the outside world. We have similar databases for China, North Korea, and Iran, and we'll let other researchers from projects focusing on those. So that's our data. How do we look at it? What's our process? Right, so one of the things we do is a tool called sentiment analysis. All right, so we analyze the articles. Right, and what are they talking about? What's the sentiment? Is it very positive, positive, neutral, negative, or very negative? Right, so you can look at the baseline, and we'll look at that here in a second. Right, so across all articles, what is the common baseline? What's the percentage of positive, neutral, negative? And you can also query the database to see sanctions. Military exercise and how much of a variation against the baseline does that create? So that, in a nutshell, is our research. So here's the baseline. Okay, so this is the Russian aggregated movement, and then you can see Russia Today. That's here. Russia Today is a state outlet. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, right? It's a state department, right? It's a group of different. Every country we've ever researched and wrote a paper on this. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, whether Iran, North Korea, or China, it's always more diplomatic. It's always more positive than the state meeting for that particular country. And so that was one finding that we had. Now, a major finding is still an interesting finding. But when these countries want to kind of attack, want to go negative, right, so these are the baselines that we operate from. You can see here 66, 67% positive, right, across all articles. Russia Today, 65% negative across all articles. All right, so then against that baseline, what do we find? Okay, so here's diplomacy. So diplomacy, we're going to use Russia Today up here, but it's similar for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and similar for Sputnik. All right, so you can see here, baseline is 65% negative, but the criticism is 77% negative. All right, so there's an 11%, 12% almost, increase in negativity related to these UN sanctions. So the UN or the EU, the US, a group of G7 criticizes Russia in a diplomatic forum, and whether Sputnik, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or the Russia Today. Right, so they don't like it, so we have a nice jump there. All right, so some people start to go, ooh, that's a pretty big jump. That's pretty negative. Should I pick D? Well, let's see. Here's I. All right, so for I, we used Reporters Without Borders and a press release criticizing Russia. So here's something very interesting. 88% negative, right, for that pressure on the information environment. Authoritarian regimes hate being pressured on the information environment. Putin, Xi, Kim, forgetting. You should allow your people to access information more freely. Hugely negative response across every country we've ever surveyed. And so, comparing the D and the I, right, the information is clearly the more impactful way, the deterrent activity, right, that you would want to use against Russia. Okay, here's the big one. Here's the M, right? Is it going to beat the 88? No. Right? 82. Right? It's still a very powerful effect. But what does a NATO military exercise do? It allows the internal entity to claim outside threat, rallies the people. Whether it's North Korea, whether it's China, we've done similar research in Iran, military creates a negative effect, but there's also a hidden positive effect that allows the government to complain about an outside threat to then attract people to rally around the flag. Right? So it's always negative, but it's never the most negative. Right? And finally, we have economic sanctions. Right? 71%, a yawn. Again, these countries have dealt with sanctions for years, for decades. North Korea has been under the world's tightest sanctions since 1950. Right? That's more than a couple of years. Right? They're used to dealing with it. So sanctions, generally, Department of Treasury claims and Department of Commerce claims aside, generally don't create a strong effect. Right? It's almost always the I, when you look at an authoritarian state, that creates the most powerful effect. So that is our research. Right? You can see here kind of in one slide. And again, the I creates the most powerful effect. Really, the most powerful effect is a combination of D and I. When you really criticize the regime, and you do that at the UN, criticisms of China's human rights record in Xinjiang, incredibly negative. Much more so than a U.S. military exercise with the law. So that is our research. That's what we'll be talking about next week. That was
All right, good morning, everybody. So I'm going to speak today about our program in New Jersey for law enforcement officers. It's a statewide program for resiliency, teaching tools to law enforcement officers in the state on how to face adversity, stress, bounce back from those stressors. That was a statewide initiative brought about by the Attorney General in 2019. I'm lucky and humbled and honored enough to be a part of this program, sort of from the ground floor. Started in Burlington County, where I'm from, with law enforcement agency Maple Shade Police Department there, and grew to be a statewide initiative. And as the program was rolling out, one of the things we talked about early on was, how are we going to study this? Are we going to do any research associated with implementing this program and looking at some baseline levels of resilience and wellness and illness in our law enforcement community? And so I had reached out to a colleague of mine at John Jay, who's listed up here, Dr. Salfati, who does a lot of work in this area, and talked about teaming up on a research project associated with the program. So that's what I'm speaking on. So as I said, in 2019, the Attorney General established this program. It is, as far as we know, the first statewide mandated program in the country for law enforcement officers, mandating a program of mental health wellness. So with the program, officers receive 12 modules of resiliency-related skills to help them deal with their daily stressors in their lives, let alone the stressors that they experience on the job in law enforcement. Key topics that are addressed in the program are to increase their resilience, right? Their ability to bounce back from adversity and face more adversity, which we all need a bit of that in our lives. Obviously, resilience is not something just exclusive to law enforcement. improve overall mental health wellness, provide additional resources and a point of contact, change the agency culture and the culture of the profession, and ultimately to save an officer's life. So this entire program was spurred by officer suicides in the state of New Jersey. And after having experienced what we saw at the time as an increase in officer suicides around 2015, 2016, we started talking as a community about something to do. So ultimately that became part of this as well. The program involves two aspects. So it's a really pretty unique program in this respect, as far as that mandate is concerned that I referenced. There's the training part. So all officers receive this training in resiliency skills, but there was also this aspect where each law enforcement agency, and there's approximately 550 in New Jersey, was required by the Attorney General to appoint a resiliency program officer. And that person must, if that person retires or leaves or goes to another agency, then they're still mandated that there always has to be an identified RPO or resiliency program officer at that agency. And that person serves in the role of a peer liaison, so a peer support liaison. We're not quite at the point where they are peer trained as peer supporters, so we refer to them as peer support liaisons. It's just a point of contact, so someone knows I have someone in my police department I can go to if I'm experiencing any kind of difficulties that will link me up with the resources that I need. So that's a pretty unique aspect of this mandate, if you will, as well. So our training our research rather mostly focuses on part A, at looking at resiliency, mental health wellness, and baseline levels of illness and compassion fatigue and life satisfaction, things along those lines. And then trying to both look at it pre-training, post-training, and then we're doing follow-up ongoing currently. So as of approximately, I think June 1st was the new date after experiencing COVID, of course, that all law enforcement officers had to be trained in this program. There are approximately 35,000 law enforcement officers in the state of New Jersey. And so we estimate at this point there are some stragglers, that at least approximately 30,000 officers have been trained in this program. For our research, we've collected almost 4,000 pre-training surveys at this point, and we have post-training surveys, which were surveys that were collected immediately after the training, about 1,300 of those, and we've analyzed approximately 2,228 of those surveys so far. As far as the breakdown, so there are 3 levels of individuals who receive this training. There are what we call the master resiliency trainers. These were the first levels of trainers. This program for military folks comes from the military, so some of this might sound familiar if you're familiar with the military programs, but we have 3 levels of training. So there's master resiliency trainers who receive the training from the FBI National Academy Associates. Those trainers then trained our RPOs, our resiliency program officers, and then the resiliency program officers and master trainers trained the officers. So it's this train the trainer model. So we have 3 different groups that we're studying as far as this research is concerned on various factors. So those factors include, their demographics, which include your common demographics, but in law enforcement world also, as far as their rank, their years on the force, their assignment, things along those lines. We have both, street level officers, we have investigators, we have corrections officers. So we have the ability to look at different groups on the factors being measured here. We are looking at, as I said earlier, psychological factors such as their resilience, compassion fatigue, PERMA, which is a measure of wellness in the officers. We look at any adversities. So what happened, so this training rolled out right before COVID, literally like days. We finished training the RPOs, the MRTs, the Master Resiliency Trainers, right before COVID. And as a result, we in our post follow-up with that group, we were able to add questions about their experiences of COVID, their experiences of the protests that were going on nationwide at the time. So we have data on that as well. And we're also looking at their use of resilient skills. So how did they apply these skills that they learned both to those adversities specifically and to other adversities they may have faced since the training. And then also we're looking at training delivery experience from the standpoint of the trainers. So just a couple of short little findings to present with you to you today on some things that we're looking. So one of the things is that these are the mean resilience levels with the resilience measure that we used for the various groups that I mentioned. So you see on this is the Connor-Davidson resilience scale, and the general population scores around a 68, which is right around medium to medium high resilience. And then all of our groups are higher than general population, with the MRTs at slightly highest, our RPOs following, and then officers. But one of the things that we talked about, we did a presentation at the Society for Police and Criminal Psychology in Quebec City in September on some of the early findings of the data. And one of the things that we talked about there is that it was interesting to find that New Jersey officers were coming into the training with relatively high resilience, which is nice, right? And a good thing for us to know about our law enforcement officers in New Jersey. But one of the things that we found that's shown on this chart here is that there's a drop off, a considerable drop off, right? So you have from 0 to 5 years, our officers who are reporting that amount of time on the force had the highest amount of resilience, high resilience, and conversely, obviously the lowest amount of low resilience. But within that 5 to 10 year mark, that next phase of their career, a 20% drop in resilience levels. And you can see that the graph continues to go down over time. So this is not shocking, right? But it's data that we really don't have. So it's exciting to kind of have these baseline levels of resilience data for law enforcement. There's only a few publications so far on resilience in law enforcement in general, and none for the state of New Jersey law enforcement officers. I said all that. And then another finding was this is self-reported illness. So this was not a measure of, that we gave a screening test for depression or a screening test for PTSD. This was self-reported. Do you have this illness? Have you been diagnosed with this illness? Or do you just think you do, right? Do you present with symptoms? And one of the things I talked about with my colleague when we decided to do self-report was, well, the criticism will be we didn't have a screening. From our perspective, it doesn't matter. If someone feels that way, if someone is reporting themselves that they feel they've either been diagnosed with this disorder or they have the symptoms of this illness, it doesn't matter if they've been labeled that way or not, right? Especially for our law enforcement professionals who may not present to ever be officially diagnosed because of all the stigma and fear to do so. Anyway, real quickly, you'll see, again, mimicking the resilience. So in kind of a quick summary of the basic findings so far, is that you had high resilience, so high levels of resilience, right, for that 0 to 5 years, and illness has, the opposite effect, right? So as resilience, went down over your time on the force, your self-reported levels of illness in depression, anxiety, and PTSD, 3 of the big ones, increased over time. You see a little bit slight variation between 15 to 20 and 20 plus years. So as I said, some of our brief findings: highly resilient officers upon hiring. That's great, right? So we're doing a good job, at least in New Jersey law enforcement, from this data of attracting highly resilient officers that are going to have to face these adversities. We see higher resilience and lower burnout. So I didn't show a graph on that, but this was one of the key findings we presented in September. We had higher resilience, lower compassion fatigue. We had higher resilience with higher wellness. So things that we hope to find. As officer illness decreases, officer wellness does the opposite. And resilience is important, but we need to understand that it's just one piece of the puzzle that we're, hoping to, further clarify with this data. Next steps, we have so much data. It's an incredible amount of data with a lot of different areas that we can pursue, and probably lots of publications to come from this for many years. But it's exciting. There's a lot that we're doing. We want to look at resilience, burnout, well-being, life satisfaction, all those things with the data and compare those different groups of officers. So much to be forthcoming that I hope to speak with many of you about in the future as well. And thank you for your time.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, gentlemen. This was great. We have 5 minutes for questions. For the panel, any questions, any comments for any of the 3 panelists? We'll have a microphone somewhere. You unmute, please, and then I will do this here. Mr. Bonner, you had wanted to say something, right? Was you?
Use this as a microphone.
Sure, of course, yeah. Understand that it's mandated in the state, but as you know, it really relies on a lot of the chiefs and leadership being bought into it. Have you seen a lot of that buy-in, push kind of in that space?
Yes and yes. So it's one question that I'm a big proponent of that myself as well. So we have a few things that help with that. One of the first was that one of the individuals from the Maple Shade Police Department that I had referenced earlier as being sort of the pioneer behind this program. The chief of police there was one of the people that pushed the state to develop this program and to push for this program. And not only was he the chief of police, but he was the president of the State Chiefs Association. So we had buy-in right from the beginning into the program. But moving forward, of course, as I mentioned, we have 550 plus agencies with different chiefs. So while I would say the large majority of our chiefs have bought in and supported this program at all levels, there are probably a few straggler agencies out there, so to speak, or that are coming along, but maybe not fully invested as many of them are. And right now, to just kind of, not take up too much time answering that, I'm pretty passionate about, as you can see, is that what we've seen recently is our current State Chiefs Police Association is not only supportive of it, but they have asked for and we've trained them, and they are developing their own resiliency team and program for the chiefs, so that Chief A from one jurisdiction, who am I going to go to if I'm experiencing stressors and issues and I need some resources? I'm not going to go to my agency, right? So they've developed this where now they'll have a group of chiefs that they can go to and say, hey, Jim, I'm having some difficulty. Can I talk to you, or can you point me to some resources? So yeah, it's amazing to see, and something I never thought that I would see in my law enforcement career to this level. So it's exciting. Great question. Thank you.
We have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Okay, let's try 2. Brian?
Hi, this question is Dr. Roser. Prior that, in the research, you notice a number of gang leaders being incarcerated, and I'm just wondering if you've noticed a decline in citizens leaving because of that, or there's been not much of a difference in that.
I guess wait for Mike. Yeah, thanks. No, that's a very, very good question. The question if there was the reality is no, it hasn't impacted citizens leaving. I think in El Salvador you've seen decreases in the past couple months, but in general, like for the past 20 years, most of the gang leaders have been behind bars calling the shots. I think if I had to honestly label the #1 problem, it's not just arresting and rearresting gang members and pumping up the numbers and this kind of show and tell. It's corruption, right? The fact that you have presidents of a country and candidates subcontracting gangs during an election, cutting deals with gangs. I guess I can say publicly, the minister who led us into the prisons was later arrested a couple of years later, right? So, I think corruption is the number one problem, but I think politicians realize, I've coined the terminal, and this punitive Darwinism. It's like the race to the bottom of who's tougher than tough on crime. But unless you strengthen institutions and democracies and the kind of whole of government approach that you hear in the military, it doesn't solve the underlying issues, because you still have ministers of security meeting with leaders behind bars. And in El Salvador, even the case that has been used as this model, when Bukele was the mayor of San Salvador, he negotiated with the 18th Street gang, the rivals, right? So we've seen this, unfortunately, for decades. But it's a very, very good question. Thank you so much for asking.
Yes.
Thank you. So I got real quick, 2 quick questions. You did mention that the gangs operate and they have control of people coming in and out of the areas, right? So in terms of migration, since they have control of these areas, how is migration in reality benefiting those groups, not just in Salvador, but if we're looking closer, the gangs in the cartels in Mexico? And the other question that I have is for Dr. Wolseley is in regards to the lower incentives for recruiting from the recruitment requirements. Do you think that will continue to influence the increase on health challenges later on?
You want to go first? Okay. So I think the first answer is a very good question. So the first answer is that basically gangs, MS-13 has been labeled as a transnational organized crime group. It's sanctioned by OFAC and the Treasury Department, and Mexican cartels like the Sinaloa cartel operate in 50 countries or a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, are much, much more powerful than gangs. But the reality is that criminal organizations are diversifying their activities. Extorting migrants is a very lucrative enterprise. Sadly, human trafficking is a very lucrative enterprise. There's 21 million victims in the world, right, that we know of. So they're really, migrants are an extremely vulnerable population. And by the way, deportees, right? People who speak English, people who have the perception that they have money or dollars. So it's not just gangs. Some of the biggest individuals, I was just in Mexico extorting migrants, are the police, right? And it's not my opinion. Like, that is well documented that the police at the local levels in Mexico have been at times involved in corruption. So I do think that, it's a very, very vulnerable population. And the fact that, you see such a large exodus of individuals for different reasons. In the Northern Triangle, it's mainly criminal violence. In Ecuador, it's political violence. Ortega's killed 800 plus students since 2018. And in Venezuela, you've seen, millions leaving for economics, crime, et cetera. So it's complicated, but I guess that would be my short answer.
I want to make sure I understand your question correctly. You're saying about recruitment efforts or recruitment?
Yeah, the recruitment efforts, my understanding is that the standards have been lowered. So because of the lower standards, right, he has the impression like we're just going to take anybody, right? So with that, do you think that can influence into, the data demonstrated in the first 5 years, the reporting levels were low. But if we are lowering the standards and allow more people to come in with possibly mental health challenges, would that later on influence the early onset on?
That's a great question, and I think you're tapping into something that is going to be important to keep an eye on, but for that factor, it kind of remains to be seen. I think that my hope, or I would imagine the law enforcement profession's hope, would be relying upon those baseline levels that should be, coming forth in their psychological exams, their pre-employment psychological exams. So ideally that standard is not being lowered as far as the standardization of the pre-employment psychological exam to get into the profession in the first place. That would hopefully be flagging and screening individuals that may have some mental health problems that would potentially impact their ability to do the job. That's the hope there, but it's certainly a great point that I think as we see the next maybe 5, 10, 15 years of new officers coming in some agencies, because I would say while standards have been lowered in many agencies, it's not across the board. So I think that in some agencies we might expect to see that, so it's something that, I don't know the answer now because there's not really much out on it, but I think that it's something to pay attention to, and a great point.
All right, thank you. We won't be able to take more questions. The panelists will still be around. Great. You can catch up. Sorry about that, but yeah, we have a guest speaker who came from out of state, and we don't want to have him wait for us. So please, let's thank our panelists. So we will normally taking 5 minutes, but we need to continue here. I'll ask our guest speaker to please join the podium. And before we switch to the next, yes, there we go.
You want to see it?
The next step is the keynote address by Mr. Eric Gornick. But before we switch to that, I would like to ask Dean Walker to please say a few words, because I think he won't be able to attend the whole event. Dean Walker is the Dean of the College of Professional Studies, also interim dean for the School of Business. It would be nice to hear from him for 2 reasons. One, because he is the dean of the college and he's the one who's approved the budget and all this so that we can have this, right? So you don't want to, So that's the most important reason. No, just kidding. So second reason is he's written his dissertation on the issue of homelessness among veterans. So a topic that is basically, a transition or a link between the keynote address topic and some of the presentations we heard earlier, especially from Dr. Whitsey. So I would like to give the opportunity to the dean to say a few words. Sir, please. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Just real quickly, so I don't take up too much time. First, I just want to thank you all for allowing me to be here. I am so impressed by the research that was presented today. I don't know about you all. Let's give them a round of applause, please. The topics that they touch on, they're so vital to our society today, right? Every aspect of what was said today. I am especially interested in Dr. Wilsey's piece, the burnout piece, the resiliency, but also to that question that this gentleman posed in the end, not just with the level of folks being accepted into the departments, but the underreporting, right? The folks that are a little bit shy to say how they're feeling inside. Because let's be fair and be honest here. Mental health challenges, or a lot of times fights that you have internally, right? You're not necessarily always so eager to express how you feel. The stigmatization associated with it is outstandingly negative. People don't even like to hire veterans or even former law enforcement officers because of our lived experiences. Is our fault of our own? No, it's not. It's the environment that you've been exposed to. I don't think I need to tell you how I feel about Jonathan Rosen and the work that he's doing. His research is just phenomenal. So thank you for that. Dr. Fisher, your topic just touched on something that we can't even speak too much in this open forum, but it's just amazing. So I'm fascinated by the research. I thank you so much, Mr. Golnick. What you're about to talk to us about today is something that's near and dear to my heart. Dr. Coach will talk about my dissertation in veteran homelessness. I wanted to solve the homelessness problem across the country because it was so so to my heart, right? It was near and dear to my heart. But as you know, doctoral students are here today. I'm sure you've heard this over and over, and if you haven't, you're going to hear it again. Narrow your scope, narrow your scope, narrow your scope. So my scope was narrowed to reducing veteran homelessness in Washington, D.C. I couldn't even begin to tell you how much that changed my life profoundly. One, because as a Marine that went to war, I came back and see a lot of my own friends become homeless. A lot of my own friends succumb to drug abuse as a matter of mental health illnesses. Myself, each day, putting one foot in front of the other, it's a challenge inside that you can't even begin to share with anybody. A lot of veterans either see themselves as walking miracles or ticking time bomb, or a combination of both. So this event today, I want to make sure that you all take away from it, not just topics of the day, but try to delve into them a little bit more. Try to see if you can incorporate some of that into your own studies, because it's very important. We have hidden dangers in our own minds that we fight with. So first, we have to give ourselves a lot of kudos for stepping forward every day. And let's be fair, right? It's not just military and law enforcement officers that are exposed and intelligence officers that are exposed to these things, right? We have people that's doing studies on a topic called urban PTSD. When I first heard it, I'm like, what is that? And then I had a doctoral student of mine that expressed to me like just your environment that you're exposed to on a daily basis can trigger you and you don't even know. So these are very important topics. I don't want to take up too much time because I want to hear from the guest speaker, but uh, I, I really love the research that was presented today. I'm happy to see our doctoral students here, so I encourage you to use these studies as example of the level of effort that you have to commit in your studies, because remember this program is, like I said on Monday when I came to speak, or I forgot the day because this week has been so long, just remember the level of commitment that it will take for you to not only produce high level research, but to live it every day when it's time for you to go speak, when it's time for you to go save the world, so to speak. Okay, so thank you all for having me. I look forward to hearing a little bit of the guest speakers' work before I have to go, so thank you very much.